In the late 1960s, audiences began hearing a sound on the bass guitar that seemed almost impossible. It wasn't a traditional bass line. It wasn't played with a pick. And it certainly didn't sound like the smooth fingerstyle approach that dominated popular music at the time. Instead, the bass was suddenly acting like a drum. It punched, it snapped, it exploded through the speakers. The remarkable part is that this sound wasn't created in a studio laboratory or by a musician searching for a new technique. It was born out of necessity. A practical problem forced one bass player to rethink his role in a band. That musician was Larry Graham, and the story of how slap bass was created is one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of modern music.
Before we continue, subscribe now, like this video, comment, and share.
To understand the birth of slap bass, we need to go back before Sly and the Family Stone. Larry Graham grew up in a musical family and spent much of his youth performing with his mother, Del Graham. During the early years, the group often worked in small clubs where budgets were limited. At one point, they found themselves performing without a drummer. For most bass players, that would have created a serious problem. Without drums, the rhythm section loses its foundation, but Larry Graham refused to let the groove disappear. He began striking the lower strings with his thumb to imitate the kick drum. Then he started pulling and releasing the higher strings to create a sharp, snare-like sound. Without realizing it, he was building the foundation of what would later become slap bass. At first, it wasn't a technique. It was simply a solution. Yet that solution would eventually influence generations of musicians, and the perfect stage for that new sound was about to arrive. By the late 1960s, Larry Graham joined Sly and the Family Stone. The band was unlike anything else in popular music. It combined funk, soul, rock, gospel, and psychedelic influences. More importantly, it demanded a rhythm section capable of driving massive audiences. Larry's unusual bass approach fit perfectly. Songs like Dance to the Music and Everyday People introduced listeners to a bass sound that felt more aggressive and rhythmic than what they were accustomed to hearing. But the breakthrough moment came with a song released in 1969, a song that bass players still study today. Thank you for letting me be myself again. The bass line wasn't sitting behind the groove. It was the groove. Every thumb strike and string pop created a rhythmic conversation that pushed the entire band forward. Listeners may not have known exactly what they were hearing, but they knew it sounded different, and bass players everywhere started paying attention. Today, many musicians point to "Thank You" as the moment slap bass entered popular culture. The recording demonstrated that the electric bass could do far more than provide low-end support. Larry Graham transformed the instrument into a rhythmic powerhouse. His thumb became part drummer. His fingers became part percussion section. The effect was revolutionary. For decades, bass players had largely followed traditional roles inherited from upright bass traditions. Larry expanded the vocabulary of the instrument. Suddenly, bass players could think differently. They could become central voices within the groove. And once the technique became visible, other musicians began asking a simple question: how exactly was he doing that? The answer would spread far beyond Sly and the Family Stone. After leaving Sly and the Family Stone, Larry formed Graham Central Station. This new band gave him complete freedom to develop his ideas. If Sly's recordings introduced slap bass to the world, Graham Central Station turned it into a defining musical language. Tracks like Pow and The Jam showcased a level of bass performance that few listeners had ever heard before. The bass wasn't merely accompanying the song, it was leading it. Larry pushed the thumb and pop technique further, creating grooves that were both musical and deeply percussive. These recordings became essential listening for aspiring bass players throughout the 1970s. By then, a new generation was already studying his work, and one young musician in particular would carry that influence into the next era. One of Larry Graham's most famous admirers was Prince. Their relationship eventually became much deeper than a simple musical friendship. Prince openly respected Graham's musicianship and often spoke about his influence. You can hear traces of Larry's rhythmic bass philosophy throughout Prince's catalog. Even when slap bass isn't present, the idea of turning rhythm into melody remains. The connection between the two artists helped introduce Larry's work to younger audiences. As Prince's popularity exploded during the 1980s, many listeners began tracing his influences backward. Again and again, they arrived at Larry Graham. But Prince wasn't the only musician paying attention. By then, slap bass had become a worldwide phenomenon. It is difficult to overstate Larry Graham's influence on bass playing. Marcus Miller built upon many of the rhythmic ideas Graham pioneered. Louis Johnson brought slap bass into countless hit records during the 1970s and 1980s. Stanley Clarke expanded the technique into jazz fusion. Decades later, Victor Wooten would push it into entirely new territory. Flea introduced elements of it to millions of rock fans through the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yet nearly all of these musicians point back to the same source: Larry Graham. Not simply because he played slap bass, but because he showed what was possible when a bass player thought beyond traditional boundaries. His influence became part of the language of the instrument itself. Many musical innovations emerged through experimentation. Others arrived through technology. Larry Graham's innovation came from necessity. A missing drummer forced him to find another way. That practical solution eventually reshaped the sound of funk, R&B, pop, gospel, fusion, and modern bass playing. Today, slap bass can be heard across countless genres. For younger musicians, it may feel like a standard technique. But there was a time when it did not exist. Someone had to imagine it. Someone had to make audiences hear it for the first time. That person was Larry Graham. And perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is that he wasn't trying to make history. He was simply trying to keep the groove alive. More than 50 years after Thank You first reached listeners, Larry Graham's influence remains impossible to ignore. Every thumb strike, every popping string, every bassist who approaches the instrument as both a melodic and rhythmic voice. All of them trace part of their musical lineage back to Larry Graham. The story behind slap bass isn't merely the story of a technique. It's the story of how creativity often emerges from limitation. A band without a drummer, a musician searching for a solution, and a sound that continues to shape music around the world. That is the story behind slap bass. And it begins with Larry Graham.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next video.